I have a songwriting question. Since you just played Coin Operated Boy, you said in the performance notes for that you let the melody and the rhythm kind of come out of the phrase of Coin Operated Boy. I wanted to know, do you always start with lyrics and move on to music? Do you sometimes start with music or melody or rhythm and let that dictate the lyrics? Or, do you sort of start from a different place each time? And whether you actually think that melody or lyrics or percussion or rhythm is actually the most important thing?
That's a good question. It's always different, but the first thing I would like to recommend is there's a fantastic book on songwriting, and it's the best book I've ever seen on songwriting, because it's not, there's a lot of sort of bullshit industry, like how to write a hit song, like terrible books on songwriting that are just useless and soulless. There's this one book that's compiled by a guy named Paul Zollo. And what he did is he just interviewed like all the world's greatest songwriters, and he condensed those interviews into a book. And so what you get is, and it's like, name a great songwriter. It's like Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, but then a lot of modern and more pop people. They're like Alanis Morissette and Madonna and, just Ani DeFranco. Like everybody is, there's maybe 60 or 70 people. And he asks really good questions about like, what's your process, where your ideas come from, And it's called Songwriters on Songwriting. And I would definitely recommend reading it because it's really great for this kind of thing. And what you see in that book is that everybody has a totally different process. And for me, songs usually almost always come in the form of like that with Coin Operated Boy. It's like a phrase or a line will come into my head. And it'll usually, if it sticks, it's because it like latches onto a melody. Like Coin Operated Boy came into my head while I was driving by a laundromat one day. And I sort of got the idea of a coin-operated boy in my head and thought that was really absurd and funny. But then it was like this bouncy little melody that didn't go away. It was like that, whatever it is. Or whatever it is, I can't even play it. And it was like, oh, that sounds really right. Like that sounds like a song that someone else has written. As soon as I think that it's a song that someone else has written, I know it's a good song. Paul McCartney once said that about Yesterday. Like he got that tune in his head and he was convinced it wasn't his. And he asked around for like a week. He was like, he sung it to people and he was like, is this already something? And they were like, no, I think it's yours. And he was like, great, it's mine. But you find that you steal a lot of things. Like there's only so many melodies and there's only so many chords, and you'll, like, I find myself ripping things off all the time and just forgiving myself because that's, because there's only 12 notes and what are you gonna do? But like the way that'll happen is sort of like that phrase or that melody will kind of bounce around in there, and if I'm in the right frame of mind and I'm feeling kind of disciplined or I don't have a whole lot of other things in my mind, it'll start to morph into a, like, what is that song going to be about? And that's sort of where the most creative part comes in for me, and that's the part I don't really like to think about, because that's that weird, dreamscape part of your brain that takes a phrase or a song and then improvises into what could be. When I thought Coin Operated Boy, it's like, okay, well obviously this is going to have to be a song about like some crazy person who wants a coin operated boy because she can't handle intimacy. That'll be a fantastic song. Everyone will love it. But that next step is sort of like that magic step that I can't really explain, where you're that's where I feel like you're starting to take dictation from some other place, and you let your brain go in different directions, or I'll sit down at the piano and jam out and just experiment with different things. But usually my brain sort of has this, like, this is what you want it to sound like, you just need to find it. And I'll sit and try and find whatever it is, and and whatever sounds wrong will sound wrong, and I'll try and find that right thing that kind of is that leading spot. And then sometimes I'll write a song from a place of, more of a concept. Like there's a song on the last Dresden Dolls record called Sing, and I wrote that song. I think that's possibly the only song I've ever written where I sat down with an idea of what I wanted a song to be about. I've never really done that before. It's usually you know, the lyric or the phrase will kind of dictate, you know, like the song will find itself through the lyrics. Like I'll write a bunch of nonsense lyrics and say like, okay, well, these are all the things that are spontaneously coming up. Maybe I can make sense of this and make it about something. But Sing was one of those songs where I was like, all right, I want to write a song that the audience can sing that's about, you know, basic, just like all singing in this at this concert together, expressing ourselves. And I think I'd had the lyric about life is no cabaret. I'd had that floating around in my head, and I was like, I'm gonna take that lyric for this song. So I like grabbed it off the shelf and plugged it into the song, and just sort of I sat and mused on the topic. And but I don't usually write that way. I don't usually think, all right, I'm gonna sit down and write a song about this. Usually it's you know, I try to figure it out as I go along. The point of it all, like that song I played first, that's the first song I've ever written on the road, because usually I write at home when I'm at my own piano and I have my little private space. And we had this sound guy on the bus with us. His name was Dave. He was great. He was our monitor guy. And he had this habit of just like zoning out completely in the way that like you knew he couldn't tell you were in the room. He was just like deep in thought. And it was amazing. Like you'd look at him and be like, Dave, and he'd be like, what? Like really bad. And it was great because like you had no idea what he was thinking about. There was just like heavy processing going on. And I caught him one morning. I was walking from the back of the bus out the front door, and I walked by him, and he was just like, and that lyric came in. I sort of was laughing to myself about it, and that lyric came into my head. You know, I think if you're the sort of person who's just constantly playing with words and I think it's also why I'm such a flaky person. Like, instead of being like, I have to get to the door and not trip over that thing and not forget my keys, instead I'm going like, wow, Dave's so whacked out. Maybe those are lyrics for songs. And the keys, I lose the keys and I trip on the thing and I get my foot run over by a car and all sorts of bad stuff happens as a result of that. But, you know, my brain is constantly playing with words, and I got the lyric that no one stares at the wall as good as you. And I was like, that's a great lyric. There's definitely a song in there. And I sort of let that bounce around in my head for the rest of the day. And then I went to my dressing room and there was a piano in there, and I wrote the rest of the song on that. And you know, it's sometimes I don't even know totally what the songs are about. Like I'll write the lyrics and I'll bring them in from different places. But I think one of the most my friend Robin Hitchcock, who's this great songwriter, I would also recommend you check out. He writes songs that are just like, they seem like complete, totally stream of consciousness nonsense, some of them. And sometimes it's important to let yourself just write without making sense. And some of the best songs and the best poetry are the words that get put together where you couldn't really say what it is that's being said. You couldn't say like, well, this is the plot, this is the scene, it's painting a very perfect picture that we can all understand. But it's that it touches something emotional, and you don't even necessarily have to be able to make sense of it. It's just, it just works. And there are definitely songs where if someone said like, well, what's that song about? I would be like, I have no fucking clue what that song is about. I just know that I wrote it, and the words all made sense together at that time. But, you know, stuff, you know, Bob Dylan songs and Leonard Cohen songs and some of the greatest songs ever written are great because they're not about anything, but they make you feel something really unnameable, and that's why music is so magical, because it can do that. And I just got really corny for a second, excuse me. But hopefully that answered a little bit of some of your question, maybe.
Hi.